All right, everybody. My name is Cynthia Alonso, and I am a committee member for this conference. And I am excited to introduce Dr. Flowers. However, I want to state first that she came totally prepared. She planned, she communicated with us, and I was so ready. And last session went so smoothly with sharing. And this session is not allowing me host controls. So I want to apologize to you but I believe in her talk so much. That's why we all were so excited to have her here. So I asked her to go ahead and free flow it, but I believe that this is going to go so beautifully. I apologize deeply. This is not the way she set this up. This is a technical error on our end. So if it's okay, I would love to just go ahead and put her on, and the time is yours. Thank you so much for being here. Please go ahead and introduce yourself, and you begin as you'd like. I will give you an emoji, a time emoji when you have 5 minutes left. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Cynthia. So again, I did have slides just for the visual interest, but we are going to free flow. And again, it's 20 minutes, which was already tight. So maybe this will work in my favor, so we can kind of get through the material. And so I do want this to be interactive. I know we're online on Zoom, but I will be asking you questions. And so please engage with me in the chat. That will help me along as well. So as Cynthia said, I'm Dr. Siobhan Flowers. And I'm excited to be here. And so, the topic that we are all here for is to challenge the narrative that success equals wellness for high achieving women. So, welcome and thank you so much again for having me. So, I kind of want to start out by setting the stage. Chances are you are here because, on some level, you identify as a high achieving woman. So, what exactly does that look like? So, most likely, you are someone who, by all accounts, appears to be thriving. You're accomplished, you are capable, you are praised consistently for your efforts, but all of those things are external to you. And so, when we begin to look kind of under the hood, so to speak, we see that internally, you're also running on empty. And so, let me know in the chat if that resonates with you, just that concept. So, as a central guiding question, one thing that I do want to explore today: what if looking like you have it all together is exactly the very thing that keeps you from getting the help and the support that you need? And so that is my charge for you today. I want you to be able to leave this session with not feeling like you have more to do, but I want you to leave here today with the language, with insights, and with practical strategies. So we are challenging this assumption that external success is an indicator for internal wellness. And so, and I see your participation in the chat. Yes, I think it's just one of those common themes, especially among high achieving women. It's something that resonates with all of us. And so, part of the cultural narrative that we're challenging is this overarching kind of dominant narrative that somehow our level of productivity is tied to self-worth, and that somehow like how resilient we are equates to how healthy we are. And it's tricky because if we are seemingly all, it must mean that we're thriving, right? And even the word thriving in this context becomes problematic because thriving typically means that you're growing, you're flourishing. It means and it implies an overabundance of something. And that's not necessarily a good thing when you're talking about carrying an overabundance of weight and responsibilities. And so, again, it's you have to take a look at what all you're carrying and the fact that sometimes you're also carrying it on your own. You're carrying it by yourself. So it looks like do we have slides available now? Or should I just keep going? Just let me know.
We do. Do you still want them? I didn't want them to distract you.
That would be helpful. I think we're
Yep.
on slide maybe slide 5.
Slide 5. You got it.
Okay, perfect. All right, good deal. And so these dominant narratives, they are constantly reinforced by society at large. When professionally we are praised for overperformance, or even socially when we fall into this strong woman or superwoman kind of archetype. And then even internally, we can be our own worst critic. As women, we tend to police ourselves to the point of exhaustion, it seems like. Okay, so one thing that I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to mute the doorbell in and out because that part is distracting. So let me just see if I can. I don't know if I have permission to do that. So I don't know if someone does have permission to mute.
I'll work on that on my end. I'm sorry
All
about
right, no
that.
problem. No problem. All right. So next slide. Okay, the host. Okay, I think okay now. All right, good deal. So, how many of you have been told that you are quote unquote so strong during a time that you are actually struggling? If this resonates, let me know in the chat. You were actually struggling, but by all accounts, you gave the appearance that everything is fine. And so this is clearly a paradox that exists here because appearing to cope well can be the barrier to you receiving the mental or emotional health support that you need. And so what ends up happening is women who need support the most are least likely to be identified to receive it, and they're least likely to self-refer because a lot of times we may have unknowingly normalized the behavior. And so part of what gets missed is this kind of chronic low grade distress, the emotional exhaustion, that persistent kind of internal pressure. And all of these feelings and symptoms, they really have no name or no kind of official diagnosis, but you feel it. And even though it exists right above the baseline, you still feel it and it still has an impact on you. All right, next slide, please. So in this case, even though there might not be an actual clinical mental health diagnosis that you're experiencing, I think we can all agree that operating in this way for any extended amount of time can affect your brain and your nervous system. So just because you may appear to be high functioning doesn't mean that it's not taking a toll on your wellness. So I just want to offer a brief embodied moment. I want you to just notice where you are in terms of your breath right now. Acknowledge your breathing. Kind of do a scan. If there's any tension in your jaw, in your shoulder area, anywhere throughout your body, if there's anywhere that you feel there is tension, I want you to contract and then I want you to release. Anywhere that you may feel the buildup of stress or pressure right now. This is what I refer to. You may have heard it as, in terms of like the progressive muscle relaxation. I like to call it, it's the real time regulation. When you take time to really assess how you're feeling in the present moment, we have to practice this releasing and not suppressing in real time. But the key is you have to make a practice of doing this on a consistent basis. And ideally, you do this before you reach a crisis point. So it's getting reflective, it's being mindful and just noticing what's coming up for you. Because at the nervous system level, what sustained overperformance does over time to our brains and our bodies, it keeps us in this heightened chronic sympathetic nervous system state, this activation of fight, flight, freeze. I'm sure you are all familiar with that. All of that kicks into overdrive and it releases cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And so we become so dysregulated for so long that our brains almost learn to function in this state. And so unfortunately, it in the name of survival, it starts to normalize the dysfunction and hypervigilance starts to feel safe. And so this becomes like our default way of operating when it starts to normalize the dysfunction. So a key reframe that I want you to take with you in terms of behaviors like perfectionism, the hypervigilance that I just mentioned, the over responsibility, these actually are not necessarily strengths to be celebrated. I want you to view them as like maladaptive nervous system responses. It's the behaviors that you've had to exhibit in order to survive, in order to adapt to all of the high demand, high expectations that you're under. So now you have to unlearn and then relearn a new association of what truly over responsibility and over performance really means. And again, unlearning that that they are strengths. It's not something that you should wear as a badge of honor, despite you being praised by society at large for it. But again, this is the paradigm shift. When you're able to see, it's like, you know what, these actually aren't really healthy behaviors. There are things that I'm having to do in the name of survival. Okay. So it's important for me to highlight this because these are also behaviors that have kept you successful and they've kept you alive. But sometimes the things that keep us alive, especially in the name of survival, they can also keep us from living if we are not careful. If we remain stuck in that fight, flight, freeze, if we let the perfectionism or the anxiety constantly run the show, it really keeps us from living. All right. Next slide. And unfortunately, just having the insight about this alone does not fix the issue. We are all very intelligent women gathered here today. And I think we all have the awareness. You can have all of the awareness in the world, but you can know exactly what is happening within you and still not be able to stop the behaviors because your body holds the memory, it holds the default habits, it holds the pattern that has been normalized. And so you cannot just cognitively think your way back into a regulated nervous system. So we have to be able to distinguish between high functioning behavior, which is more so rooted in survival, and we have to be able to separate that from true psychological wellness. And the way that I like to conceptualize this is by viewing functioning as being all about output, it's external, whereas wellness is all about your internal state. It's about that inner sense of safety, that felt sense of safety and sustainability. All right, next slide, please. So, in addition to strategizing around regulation and safety, it's also important that we notice and that we name some of the hidden costs about these internalized beliefs that we're trying to actively move away from. So, I want you to think about a belief that you hold about rest, a belief that you may hold about what it feels like to ask for help. What do you believe about slowing down? Where did these beliefs come from? Did your beliefs come from you, your own set of values, or did you sustain them from maybe it was your family of origin? We've all heard this concept of like our parents' outer voice may tend to become our inner voice. And so I really want you to reflect. If you have some insight, feel free to share it in the chat. So for the sake of time, no need to kind of come off mute and share, but if you want to drop it in the chat, just that quick assessment to say, where did these narratives come from? Allison says asking for help feels uncomfortable, accepting it, yeah, feels like I'm being lazy. So that is the insight is key. And now we have to peel back the layers. Where did this narrative come from? Where did we first get the idea that it feels uncomfortable? What messages are running the show and where did they come from? And if they're not yours, what can we substitute those messages with? Amber, exactly. A lot of it does come from society at large. And so there's also an invisible load that comes with all of this, the mental and emotional labor. And this is the type, it's rarely quantified, but we know that it exists. The labor that comes from anticipating other people's needs, constantly monitoring the state of your relationships, managing the emotions of other people around you. Really, this looks like you prioritizing other people's nervous systems over your own. And so continuing to carry this load, it reinforces these harmful internalized beliefs. One that continues, it perpetuates the status quo. Like if I slow down, everything's going to fall apart. Or if I need help, that means I'm failing to piggyback off of what is in the chat. I should be able to handle this on my own. So with all of these things going on internally, this is why a lot of surface level, external, more traditional coping strategies, they don't often work long term. So again, the more insight, self-awareness you have, it makes for better time management, just being more efficient. But I think on some level, you don't need to be told to be more efficient. I imagine you are probably one of the most efficient people that you know, even if maybe you have a little bit of neurodivergence, right? And so, even at the end of the day, all of these strategies, the let's just be more efficient, let's just jump straight to making a plan, let's strategize. These strategies do not interrupt a pattern that is rooted in your nervous system and reinforced by an identity that really doesn't serve you. And so, if this overachiever identity continues, if it continues to go unaddressed, then of course, there's a real cost associated with this relationship with yourself, your physical health, diminished energy, your capacity and your ability to genuinely feel pleasure and creativity, rest, all of these things are compromised. So again, you don't need to be told to do more. You don't need to be told to be more efficient. There's something deeper that is needed. And the idea of embodiment is needed. You have to prioritize embodiment over efficiency. So that's what I want to talk about next. So next slide, please. All right. So the first strategy when it comes to a regulation-centered approach, because again, we're shifting away from productivity, moving towards wellness and what that looks like, regulation-centered wellness. Notice without fixing. And I know this is easier said than done. I think as high achievers, we naturally tend to lean into problem solving and we want to fix it. But we have to learn to recognize dysregulation, it's information. So trying not to assign either good or bad to how we're feeling, no judgment. And this is the hard part too. But being more self-compassionate means observing without absorbing. So noticing it without fixing it, really getting curious about what's coming up for you. Notice what's happening, again, without rushing to fix it. Next slide. The second strategy, cultivating micro moments of safety. We're all busy. We might not have huge blocks of time to tap into our wellness. And so, micro moments are those brief, accessible practices that signal to your brain and body, your nervous system, that the threat or whatever it is that has activated you has passed. And so, I'm not talking about those big, elaborate kind of self care routines that take up a lot of time and money. It's really those small, consistent practices. The things like noticing your breathing, the things like orienting yourself to the room around you, physically grounding yourself. It's taking it in those micro moments consistently over time that really help you to feel grounded and more regulated. Because when we talk about safety, there's two pathways to safety. One is through avoidance and protection. That's not the healthy pathway to safety. It may work temporarily because, yeah, if you can keep things out from a view of protection, it's helpful. But if you keep the bad stuff out, it'll also keep the good stuff from coming in. So the better pathway for safety is safety through connection, not from protection, but safety through connection, connection with self and connection with other people. All right, third slide. Next slide, please. The third point here, we also have to break up and interrupt the thoughts and behaviors that reinforce the overperformance cycle. So if you can catch yourself in real time and identify those specific internal narratives that perpetuate the status quo, once you've identified it, then you'll need to create like a pause point. And a pause point doesn't mean you pausing just to insert like toxic positivity. I don't believe in that either. But you have to differentiate between toxic positivity and reframing thoughts that are actually more helpful and more productive in nature. So, getting curious about what is driving the cycle. And these strategies can apply to you as an individual, but also in a leadership context. So, let's just say you are leading a team. What does support look like for not just you, but the members of your team? It could be as simple as those temperature checks. It could be as simple as taking time to, again, not just check in, but think about these deadlines. Where did this come from? If you're taking on a new initiative, a new project, energetically, how does this feel? What does your capacity look like in real time? So, when it comes to creating strategy, especially around these different areas, the main thing is to not view all of these three strategies as more to do it's really part of a larger strategy that actually allows you to do less in the long run. Because if you're constantly assessing how you're feeling, you're able to ideally release some things with less guilt, proactively, even preventatively. All right, next slide. All right, so as we close out, I want you to think about your current identity and I want you to just consider a different ending. Okay. So, in some ways, it's not even just a different ending. You can also look at it as a new beginning, one that does not include more productivity, but permission to actually be known and valued and seen beyond your level of output or productivity. And so we have to kind of redefine what success and wellness is. So, success is not evidence of wellness. Wellness is actually the capacity to feel, to rest, even to struggle, and still come back to yourself. That is true wellness. That is the definition that I like for you all to adopt. So, what would it mean for you personally or even professionally to separate your sense of self-worth from your output? And even for all of us, I know we all have obviously an ambitious spirit, but for that not to be the primary motivating factor that influences our behavior or how we see ourselves. Okay. All right, next slide. So I want to leave you with one simple next step. I want to invite you to find out exactly where you are in this process because knowing that you're high functioning is not the same as knowing what your current internal state is. And so you can feel free to reach out and keep in touch with me. I have created a free capacity assessment. It kind of shows you the state that you're currently operating from, whether it's survival, safety, or expansion. And depending on how you rank, it'll give you some personalized next steps. And so it was a pleasure to be here with you all today. I'm so glad we got the slides up and running. Thank you so much for spending this time. I don't know, we kind of had a late start, but I don't know if we have time for a question or two.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. And if we don't have time for all of the questions, my DMs are open, and so I'm available even after this session today. So, what questions do we have? I'm going to look through the chat here.
We
So,
have some good ones
Jordan,
in the chat.
okay, good, good. So I'm going to just read here. Okay, so by any chance, is there a connection between identifying as high performing and being neurodivergent, particularly if you were a late diagnosed neurodivergent person? So I think there is some connection because, again, especially if it's a late diagnosis, you may have been operating in ways that, again, were out of survival, out of what you have had to do to adapt depending upon what your diagnosis is. And so, again, you've normalized things that maybe you didn't even know weren't normal to you until you were diagnosed later on. So, I absolutely think there's a connection. And I think for so many people, especially those diagnosed later in life, it almost provides like this huge sigh of relief. It's like, oh my gosh, there is a reason why I have felt like I was struggling, even though by outward appearances, it appears that you are successful in doing all of the right things, which I think also aids in the late diagnosis because you've been able to kind of stay above the radar for so long because you've been able to adapt so well. But again, you recognize once the diagnosis is present how a lot of those adaptations really weren't strengths. Again, it goes back to what I said with the reframe, they were survival strategies. Someone down here, let's see. Oh, rest question mark, not until chores are done, asking for, yeah, all of those things. And so hopefully this talk just invites you to open the door to just consider what rest could look like. And a lot of times we have to redefine what rest is. Again, it's not the 2 week Mediterranean cruise type vacation. If you can get that, great. But it's what is most accessible to you in the moment. If we have to constantly delay and delay and delay, eventually it's like our bodies are constantly communicating to us and our bodies are trying to whisper, like, hey, we need a break. And if you're not listening when it's whispering, it's eventually going to start screaming at you. And you don't want to get to that point until your body collapses and shuts down. And now you're forced to rest, but now it's not on your terms. And that's the key difference. So trying to be as proactive in that as possible. Any other thoughts or questions? If there is one takeaway that you have, I'd love for you to put that in the chat. It's always helpful for me to know what resonates with you. But again, I appreciate your time today, and hopefully, this at least started the kind of inner conversation with self so that you can give yourself permission to be seen as more than what you are producing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation, your time, so much wisdom. The chat light it up, y'all. And we are so honored to have you here today, Dr.